And the day has finally come, the day to talk about my favorite movie in this life, which I've already mentioned many and many times here in the channel. This is a version of my video in Portuguese that I did for my Brazilian channel upon the release of The Exorcist Believer. Ugh. And that was in the last Halloween, and usually I would wait for the next Halloween to release this version here in this channel, but I just can't stand the wait. So hold your ears because this video is gonna be a love letter to this movie that I love so much, plus one of the best sequels ever made to a movie that didn't necessarily needed one. My name is Gustavo, but you can call me Gus, and let's go! And like I said before, and it doesn't hurt to say again, The Exorcist from 1973 is my favorite movie in this life. Tied only with Aliens from James Cameron. It's not only one of the greatest classics of horror movies, but I think it's one of the greatest stories ever told in any media. We all already know the basic plots of the movie, and there has been many demonic possession movies since then, so I don't have to go that deep into this story. It all revolves around these four main characters. We have Father Karras, that is a priest that is losing his faith day by day, and he also lost his mother that recently passed. We also have the actress Chris McNeil that is making a movie in the city of Georgetown and is temporarily living with her daughter Regan McNeil in a house there. Then we have Father Merrin, who is the main exorcist priest of the story. And he is very old now, but in his youth, he had some encounters with the demon Pazuzu, the main villain of our movie, and like I said before, our dear Regan McNeil that is possessed by the demon himself. Let's go by parts. I think for many, and 50 years after its release, this is the scariest movie of all time, especially because of the theme of demonic possession that has never been shown in such a raw and cruel way like here. The Exorcist is much more than a horror movie. It is a drama. I have to be honest and admit that I don't really like this subgenre of demonic possession movies, especially because most of them released after The Exorcist till today are very generic. They don't bring any themes, they don't make me feel tense, they don't talk about anything, they don't have any other layer besides the jump scares. By the way, most of them are made just to have jump scares, and this is basically all that The Exorcist is not, because here we have one of the rare cases where direction and script blend perfectly, having these both elements working in perfect harmony at every frame of the narrative. And the script and the book which the movie was adapted from comes from the writer William Peter Blatty, who in my opinion is a hell of a writer, no pun intended, and the direction comes from one of the guys who I most admire in Hollywood, that is William Friedkin, director that unfortunately passed away last year, and he has many other phenomenal movies in his career besides The Exorcist, movies like Sorcerer, The French Connection, Cruising, To Live and Die in LA, Hunted, Killer Joe, and the list goes on. And I also admired William Friedkin not only by his movies, but by the stories that he used to tell. And he was a hell of a storyteller, no pun intended again. You can watch any interview with him and it's just fascinating to hear the man speak. Any story that the man used to tell about his career, his movies, his life was just so nice to hear that it was proof that the man was a storyteller by heart. Especially the stories about the making of The Exorcist. How he was able to cast the young Linda Blair to the role of Regan McNeil, something that was extremely complicated to the production because they had to find a young girl who was going to do all the absurd things in the script and wouldn't be traumatized for life. And also how the script of The Exorcist got to his hands, which is one of the most interesting stories because it happened basically because of honesty. Before being a famous director, because William Friedkin had already directed The French Connection and won an Oscar with the movie before directing The Exorcist, Friedkin was in a meeting with a big shot producer that wanted him to direct an action movie. He read the script of this movie and hated it, and with all his honesty and innocence, he told this in the face of the producer that expelled him from his office, almost beating his ass. What he didn't know is that there was a writer listening to the conversation in the corner of the office during the entire meeting, and his name was William Peter Blatty. So Peter Blatty went after William Friedkin in the parking lot of the building that there were, and thanked him for his honesty of saying that the script was bollocks. Since William Peter Blatty himself was the one who wrote the script for the producer, and he himself knew that the script was terrible, but no one in that office had the balls to say that in the face of the big shot producer. And William Friedkin had been the first one to do that. And after this conversation, they shook hands and went on their merry ways. But Peter Blatty remembered of William Friedkin when he wrote the book of The Exorcist years later, and he knew that he wanted Friedkin to direct this movie in case it was adapted. So boys and girls listening, learn from this story. Honesty always pays out. But going back to the movie, what I meant to say with this story is that these two minds working together were essential to make The Exorcist this special movie that it is, especially because Friedkin had come from a history of documentaries that he had directed in the beginning of his career, and he brings this certain reality to every movie he directs. This is a movie that every time I watch, I catch a new detail or layer that I hadn't before. And the last time I watched it, I got a little shocked how I never paid such attention to the editing of the movie and how it plays with this documental feeling. One scene cutting to another is always abrupt, and they don't have these perfect transitions that most movies have. It's always the movie shows you an information like a conversation between two characters, and boom, cut to another scene. There's no time wasted in frivolous scenes just to make the length longer. And this style of editing brings a certain discomfort to the audience, because all the information, whether in a normal conversation or in a shocking scene, stays in your mind, but you don't have much time to digest the thing and just goes to other events. The whole thing moves on just like in real life. And this documental tone also preserves the realism of this universe in the city of Georgetown, in the streets, in the churches, in the houses. Different than any other movie that you see characters executing actions of a script. And here it looks like life is just going by, whether it is with a main character or a smaller character from the story, having their own moments to show personal characteristics, sometimes talking about casual things that doesn't even have anything to do with the main plot. And this is what always brought me this sense of tension in the movie. Like Friedkin himself said in an interview, this movie is not about the alien or about an abandoned house in the middle of nowhere. Here the story is about real people in a real house where in the second floor there is a girl who is possessed by a demon. And this is happening right there, where normal people are just casually walking outside. And they don't even imagine that in the second floor of that house something very horrible is happening. Which brings us to the performances of the cast, starting by the one who I believe is the main character of the movie, even though the focus is on Regan McNeil, that is Father Karras, played by the incredible actor Jason Miller, who did few movies, and let's take a moment to see how he's not a handsome actor of Hollywood, or a Jack Nicholson, or a Michael Caine, or one of the greatest actors of the past, who could turn this movie into a vehicle for a famous star. No, here we have this guy who looks like an uncle of mine, or just a regular guy or a regular priest in a church of your neighborhood, which is something that truly helps in the realism of the movie, not mentioning that his character arc is the greatest of the movie because, like I said before, he is a priest that is losing his faith. And to save a little girl that he doesn't even know, he has to get strength out of nowhere and regain his faith back. Then we have Chris McNeil, who is played by Ellen Burstyn, And this is probably my favorite performance of the movie, because boy, the desperation that she transmits by the fact of watching her daughter rotting away without any comprehension of what is happening, and without any answer from the greatest specialists in medicine that Regan passes by, it's very realistic. It's the pure horror of a mother that doesn't know what to do. And this has to do with the idea that her character is a famous actress who lives in this life of glamour in Hollywood. And she's not a bad mother by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, she treats her daughter with great affection and love, but with these inexplicable events, she is dragged to a reality that is so palpable and raw that is very far from all the glamour that she lives. And this goes to all the other characters in this plot, even the smallest ones like Father Dyer, who is the best friend of Father Karras, who is a very interesting and kind character, who is a support for his friend that just lost his mother. And he's also very important for the Exorcist 3 that we're gonna talk later. Not only him, but especially the detective Kinderman, who is a character that is kind of losing the plot, in my opinion, who is investigating the whole event surrounding the possession of Regan without really knowing about the possession itself, and that is played with a wonderful charisma by the actor Lee J. Cobb. So save the name of this character because this one I will talk a lot in The Exorcist 3. And all these elements blend together in a story that the message is about the great power of the mystery of faith. Look, I'm not a religious person, I don't have any beliefs, but I can't deny that some elements of the Bible are very fascinating in terms of story. These ideas of heaven and hell and the fight between angels and demons. So much so that my first novel, The Angel of Fire, still is about that. And it is already available in the Amazon website as an ebook, and you can buy it right down here by the link of the site in the description of this video. So if you would like to read a great dark fantasy that is also an epic in a universe of angels and demons, please take a look because I'm sure you're gonna love it. So having this fascination in my mind, I cannot ignore the power of this story. And even though the common sense is that this is a story about a demon who possesses the body of a young girl, it's exactly the contrary. It's about the power of good over evil, no matter its shape. And it's all represented in the regaining of faith by Father Karras. Plus, the focus of this movie, it's also not about this girl who is being possessed, but what this supernatural event can cause in the characters around. Because as you noticed, I talked much more about the dramas of Father Karras and the mother of the girl than the girl itself. But since we're here, I cannot even explain how much I'm in love with this character and the performance of the young Linda Blair. So much so that if I have a daughter someday, her name will be Regan. But jokes aside, here you have a performance that starts very normal with a girl that is very charismatic and spontaneous, especially in her affection with her mother, which makes us as desperate as the mother when the bad things starts to happening with the girl. Then we have all her evolution into becoming this demon, which makes this one of the most powerful performances of cinema for me, since you progressively watch her become a completely different being, coming to a climax that is helped especially because of her makeup that still holds up as one of the scariest makeups ever done till this day. You have one of the best conceived monsters of all history. And you know I am a strange person, but I really love this makeup. It's so beautiful. It really shows the destruction of this girl, and her rotting skin is so visceral that I don't think any other makeup in any other movie will ever beat this one. So much so that not even this, the last movie, was able to reach. Quack quack. Anyway, to finish here with my love towards this movie, what I think it works in The Exorcist, not only for me but every member of the audience, is because of the fear of the unknown. Something that every other movie, and especially the recent ones, should learn. that what causes fear in people is not things that you can see and conceive, but exactly the otherwise. What it simply doesn't have any explanation, because many things in the movie regarding the demonic possession are merely explained, because they don't have to. Everything is in the subconscious, in the implied, in the suggestion of some lines, and not in a monologue that many movies have to have this idea of exposition nowadays. And this is where the movie triumphs and becomes one of my passions of cinema. Now, doesn't the movie have any flaws? Of course it has. There's no perfect movie. It hurts me to say, but there are some minor flaws. All those quick images of the demon showing up in the house of Chris MacNeil, or in very quick moments, matter of seconds, that the face of Pazuzu shows up on the screen, it just doesn't work for me. I think they are unnecessary. As I just said, everything in the movie is implied. There's no need to show the demon and these evil references. And the makeup of Pazuzu is just bad for me. So it's just a little hiccup in the construction of all the things in the movie, but this is me, because I do believe many people are terrified of these images. So even this works depending on the point of view. But going back to the positives, every time I finish this movie, I always have this feeling of, woof, I enjoyed this ride. And in the last scene that you have Detective Kinderman meeting with Father Dyer in front of the house and talking about everything that happened in there, crossing the street to create this very interesting friendship and moving on with their lives, I always think with myself, what a great journey. And there's no need for sequels. You see the segue? And then we come to The Exorcist 3! And before we talk about this movie, let me first just tell you a quick message of the channel, so stick around, because as you noticed, the background of the wallpaper today is from my Brazilian channel, so I need to tell you this message before we continue. And if you are liking the content of Trashing with Gus, please consider becoming a patron of the channel. This is a small channel, and channels like mine, where the creators don't receive 1 cent to create the content, struggle a lot to finally get to the point that they can support themselves. So I very humbly ask you that if you can, go to the link of my Patreon below in the description of the video and contribute with whatever value you can donate for the channel to keep going so we can keep trashing together forever. I'll be eternally grateful. Plus, there are categories of rewards that you will receive from the channel depending on which one you choose. And let's go back. The Exorcist 3 is a great surprise in my life, because I always refused to watch any other sequel from The Exorcist. I tried to watch Exorcist 2 one time and it just didn't work. It's everything everybody says about a boring movie that you just can't keep focused on. The Exorcist 4, I really never watched it, even though there are 2 versions of the movie and I didn't watch any of them. And the last series, The Exorcist, I tried to watch, but it just didn't get me. And let's not talk about the last release, The Exorcist Believer, this sequel, requel, reboot, whatever you want to call it, because I have something saved for it later. Anyway, I never felt there was a link between the first Exorcist and other story that deserved to be told. But then, The Exorcist 3 is directed by William Peter Blatty, the writer of the first original novel, The Exorcist, and screenwriter of the first movie. Then I realized that this movie was being rediscovered by a new generation and being talked a lot, very well regarded as one of the best sequels ever made, and one story that is in the same standard of quality of the first one. Of course, I had to see this for myself, so I already watched this movie twice, and I have to say, I love it. The Exorcist 3 Legion, that is also adapted from a book of William Peter Blatty that is called Only Legion, is a direct sequel from the events of The Exorcist 1. But it's also not so direct because it takes only 2 main characters from that original movie, that is Father Dyer and especially Detective Kinderman, exact the same characters that finished the first movie, and continues their story. So much so that I understand the writer William Peter Blatty thinking about these 2 characters while writing the first story and thinking that they had a lot of potential to other stories. Especially Kinderman, who was a detective that, like I said, is kinda loose in the first movie, besides being a very charismatic character. That's why I believe he decided to give this character his solo story in this universe, kind of. This time unraveling a murder mystery that can have some connection with demonic possession, and possibly a connection with the events of the possession that happened with Regan McNeil. And here the character is played by the great George C. Scott, in an incredible performance that is Oscar-worthy in my opinion, because unfortunately the actor Lee J. Cobb that played the character in the first movie died some years after its release. And even though I would like to talk about the plot of The Exorcist 3, I will try to contain myself because I think this is a movie that many people still have to discover. And yes, this is a sequel that indeed is in the same standards of the first Exorcist, although I don't think it's better, of course, but I do think that this is a sequel that does exactly what true sequels should do, to tell another story that has elements of the original movie, but that is a completely different one in its spirit. This is not a demonic possession movie more than a criminal investigation one, in the vibe of movies like Seven or series like True Detective, but that has these elements of the possession. And as the title of the movie says, Legion is not about only one demon now, but many. And it's a very involving plot where we see this detective that is kind of in the end of his career and very depressed, pretty numb to the world around him. After seeing so many crimes in his life and career, and now seeing a new wave of murders that just don't have any explanation, especially because of their reason and the strange way they are executed. And little by little, he starts to put pieces together that take back to old crimes of history and bring them to the current context of these new crimes being executed, and take the whole thing to the demonic possession area that in the end of the day, it's what is hidden behind the curtains. And what else can I say besides this? Because I strongly suggest that you go after this movie if you haven't watched it yet. It should be a great classic of suspense genre at least, with some horror elements, of course. But I can say that besides the incredible performance of George C. Scott, the script, the lines of dialogue, the dynamic between the characters are superb examples of writing, especially because they were written by William Peter Blatty, that here also displays incredible abilities of directing. The decisions of how to shoot the frames, how to craft the situations of the movie, whether they are sinister or not, are great examples of superb direction. We have some dream sequences in this movie that are not exactly scary for the sake of being scary, but for being very bizarre and having images that stick in your mind. It's that idea of the image that you just can't explain what it is. And the most interesting is that William Peter Blatty, that unfortunately also already passed, has directed only 2 movies. This one and another called The Ninth Configuration that I started to watch, and it definitely has some elements of book writing or book narrative, if you know what I mean. But anyway, here in Exorcist 3 you have so many well-directed scenes, especially one that is being rediscovered now as one of the scariest jump scares of all time. And I have to agree. To preserve you that haven't watched The Exorcist 3 and is curious to do it, I won't even describe the scene itself, but it has to do with this image, and it takes place in a hospital at night. The only thing that I will say is that this is a very long scene that builds the tension very slowly without you even suspecting what is going to happen until the jump scare shows up. And do you want to know why I think this is one of the greatest jump scares of all cinema? Because my first experience by watching it wasn't even watching the whole movie, but only this scene in a YouTube video. But the great detail was, I was watching it with no sound. I had no headphones, nothing. I was just watching it in the screen of my cell phone. And again, this scene is so well directed that it just grabs your eye and you just want to keep looking at this corridor. And don't be fooled, because in the middle of the scene there is a fake jump scare just to throw you off of what's really going to happen at the end of the scene. The point is, even though I was watching this scene with no sound, when the jump scare finally happens, it happens in a way that it doesn't use only the sound to create the scare. It also has a very jarring camera movement. And this element, even with no sound, it scared me, which shows the great power of a very precise direction and its idea to manipulate the perception of the audience. Anyway, I told you enough. If you really want to see for yourself, I suggest you do it. But again, The Exorcist 3 is a great movie that is not better than the first one, but of course, few movies in this world will be. But like I said, if you like this idea of criminal investigation with supernatural elements, my gosh, this is a perfect one. That being said, there are no other sequels to The Exorcist 1 for me. So with that, we can enter in the idea of the last movie released, The Exorcist Believer, and why I said I have something saved for it. Actually, it's just a commentary on the idea that it's high time that the studios get rid of this idea of just treating their properties like properties. I know, I'm not in the movie business and I'm not a studio executive, and I know these people only want to make money out of these famous properties that has a name to call audiences, but it's about time they realize that just using the property without actually creating a story behind is just not worth it. If an executive is watching this video now, he's probably saying, "Oh Gus, you're so innocent." I know. I'm just saying, look at the failure that this movie was. When we gonna start to create the new stories that will be iconic and memorable in the future, and the next generation of studio execs will want to reboot and redo just to get money? You know what I'm saying? It's about time we let these franchises behind and just move on to find the new William Friedkins and William Peter Blatty's that will create the new great stories for the future. I know, I'm being very innocent, but I just had to say that before this video ended. And I don't really want to talk about this last movie, Exorcist Believer, because beating the dead corpse is just not something I like to do, and everybody knows that this is not only a dead corpse, but is a dead demonic corpse. So let's just bury it in hell, pretend it didn't exist, and move on. And this is it for now. What about you? What do you think about The Exorcist? And have you watched its true sequel, The Exorcist 3 Legion? Comment below. And please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you are liking this trashing content, so we can keep trashing together. Thank you so much. See you in the next Trashing with Gus, and bye bye.